Hello, friends. Welcome. After some gap, we must continue our exciting journey of the Indic civilization, which we began by establishing its antiquity at 17,000 years.
And today we'll talk of a century of tragedy, starting in 1680 with the death of Shivaji Maharaj. In the 1700s, it began with the martyrdom of Guru Gobind Singh Ji in 1708, martyrdom of Banda Bahadur 1716, sacking of Delhi by Nadir Shah 1738, Battle of Palashi, the British gain a foothold 1757, the Third Battle of Panipat, Great Maratha losses 1761, blinding of the Delhi Emperor in his own court 1788.
We've been then tracing the Arab invasions, the Turkic invasions, the Sultanates, the Mughals, and then the supreme sacrifices is what we dealt with in our previous episode. Because we must realize that Bharat-varsha is such a large country that, frankly, if all of them got together, there's no force on earth that could have ever dominated them. We must not forget that this large body of people finally are bound together by one cultural synthesis, by one heritage which comes from is largely influenced by the bedrock of the prevailing religion, which is the Hinduism, or which has been founded upon the Vedas. So, all said and done, in spite of multiple cuisines, multiple dresses, multiple tastes, multiple interests, and whatever, in all its plurality, what binds these people together has been this bedrock of their foundation, which is a philosophical thought of the Vedas. And we'll, of course, get to the Vedas later, but we'll right now look at what really was threatening this civilization. We saw of Guru Gobind Singh Ji's sacrifices and then the sacrifice of the first Khalsa army under Banda Bahadur. And when he briefly established a Khalsa kingdom or a Sikh kingdom at that time. But then very soon he was captured and he was put to death in the most inhuman form, and that's what we had dealt with in the last episode. And now we are in that period of, the early quarter of the 18th century, that is roughly the 1700 onwards to 1725, 1738. Now remember, India had been dominating the world in terms of its GDP. But for the first time, it was around 1727 that China overtook the GDP of India. It was at this time that Nadir Shah from Iran laid his eyes on India and he thought of making a foray into the Mughal territory and then loot and capture some of its riches. So in 1738, Nadir Shah comes to Delhi.
Muhammad Shah was the Mughal emperor in Delhi. In February 1738, at the Battle of Karnal, Nadir Shah defeated Muhammad Shah and took him prisoner. Muhammad Shah handed over the keys of Delhi to him, and in Delhi, Nadir Shah's forces massacred some 30,000 civilians in a day. There was widespread rape and looting, and he took some 10,000 slaves. And in 1739, he ceded the territory back to Muhammad Shah and left Delhi back to Iran. However, on his way back, he was accosted by Sikh fighters who then were able to recover a good part of the wealth and also were able to free most of the slaves that were taken by him. But he had looted by then already uh, $700 million worth of loot, which included the Peacock Throne and also the Kohinoor Diamond.
Yet, this $700 million equivalent worth of wealth that Nadir Shah took away from an India that was at that time had fallen below the Chinese GDP. Yet Nadir Shah was able to write off taxes for 3 years in the kingdom, in his kingdom of Iran. And whilst he needed these monies to also fight his other competitor on the other side, the Ottoman emperors, which was his main aim, yet he had enough surplus to be able to not impose any taxes on his subjects for a period of 3 years. That tells you the wealth of this nation.
Then in 1757, the Battle of Palashi took place. Of course, you'd have read a lot about the Battle of Plassey in your history book, so I will not enumerate much out here. But the British forces, led by Robert Clive, defeated the Nawab of Bengal in the east of the country. And for the first time, the British were able to gain a significant foothold in that region. After this battle, the loot that Clive was able to take from the Nawab made him the richest man in all of England. So the wealth from one Nawab that he took away as bounty makes him the richest man in all of England.
And later, of course, the Maratha power was rising. The Maratha power had already consolidated a lot of areas. They were the descendants of Shivaji Maharaj. I'm not going into those details because those are modern history, are mainstream history, and you are more or less aware. I'll only keep dwelling into these smaller nooks and corners, or sometimes connecting the dots, just so that you are able to understand and get the gist of what we're trying to narrate in our series, wherein this is the 29th episode today.
During this time, the Marathas were gaining ascendancy. The legacy of Shivaji Maharaj so energized them that the Maratha Confederacy held sway over large parts of the continent. Now, with the Mughals weakened, even the Mughal emperor sought the protection of the Marathas. After Chhatrapati Shivaji Maharaj, the Marathas were gaining in strength year on year. By 1759, they were holding a massive empire all the way from Peshawar in the north to Tamil Nadu in the south and the Hooghly River in West Bengal in the south, in the east. This was in 1759. And this was for the first time in several centuries that a completely homegrown empire was holding sway over most of the subcontinent. And this was in the interregnum after the decline of the Mughal Empire, before the British colonial ascendancy uh, in the 19th century. However, tragically, this did not last very long, and the Marathas suffered a severe blow barely 2 years later in the Third Battle of Panipat. In the Third Battle of Panipat in 1761, the Marathas lost the battle and suffered huge losses. The fight was against Ahmad Shah Abdali, an Afghan, whose father was a chieftain in the province of Herat and had rebelled against Nadir Shah. But having been subdued, Abdali ended up serving Nadir Shah. And under Nadir Shah, he even accompanied him to Delhi during his campaign of 1738. And he was able to observe how weakened the Mughal Empire was. So, very soon after he was left behind by Nadir Shah on his way back to Iran, Abdali grouped himself, and from there he came and attacked Delhi. The Marathas came to the rescue of the Delhi emperor and first of all drove them out of Delhi. But then, in the fateful battle in Panipat, 1761, the losses were huge on both sides.
The Third Battle of Panipat is a sad story in terms of certain errors that took place on the Maratha side and certain factors that mattered, because of which the Marathas lost the Third Battle of Panipat. But then it was a Pyrrhic victory for Ahmad Shah Abdali, because frankly, even he was very badly decimated in terms of his troops, and could not retain any further, ambitions in India. And even though he gained this victory, he actually retreated back and went back to Afghanistan. And after this battle, the Marathas, as a result of this, also got quite significantly weakened. but yet they still held their sway over over the Indian territory. And but then the looting of Delhi and the humiliation of the Mughal emperor by Nadir Shah did not go unnoticed by the East India Company, who were now becoming a stronger force in the east of India. For the first time, they realized that this entire pomp and show and this grandeur of the Mughal Empire was actually hollow, because they realized that this was a very wealthy empire with very poor military standing. However, they were wary of the Marathas, because the Marathas were providing the Mughal emperor with security, and the Mughal emperor looked towards the Marathas for his protection.
In the aftermath of the Third Battle of Panipat, Ahmad Shah Abdali had, of course, become quite weakened, and he eventually died in 1772. However, the Afghan warlords became quite a menace in the northwestern parts of the country, to the extent that one of them, by name Ghulam Qadir, he was in the Mughal court, and his audacity was such that he went across and pulled the emperor down, climbed up onto him, and actually gouged out his eyes in the presence of all his courtiers. And this happened in the Grand Mughal Darbar in the year 1788.
Can you imagine the plight of the Mughal emperor, that a warlord, an Afghan warlord, is not only able to humiliate and insult him, he pulls him down from the throne, throws him on the floor in his own darbar, climbs up onto him, and is even able to gouge out his eyes? Well, it was a terrible incident. However, at that time, the great Maratha Mahaji Shinde got to know of this, and then because their protection was there over Delhi, he came back to teach a lesson to this Rohilla warlord. So he not only defeated him in battle, imprisoned him, but he also blinded him, and then later on put him to death as a penalty for what he did to the emperor, and reinstalled Shah Alam II, who was the emperor at that time, back on the Mughal throne. It was in Punjab and those areas that the first Sikh empire got established by Maharaja Ranjit Singh, and that was in 1800.
Well, friends, this is a tragic tale of the 1700s. It witnessed the rise of the Maratha power after Chhatrapati Shivaji to the formidable stage of 1759 when they commanded a large empire. But then, soon after, they suffered the setback of the Third Battle of Panipat. And even though after that they defeated the British in the First Anglo Maratha War, they ultimately waned as a power and ceased to exist by 1820. The Khalsa Panth, started by Guru Gobind Singh Ji in 1699, took 100 years before the first Sikh empire was established in 1800. But that didn't last beyond 50 years either. The sacking of Delhi, witnessed by the colonial powers, the Battle of Palashi, these gave them a fillip and enabled them to get a grip around this glorious land. We will see a lot more history in the coming episodes.
Thank you very much for watching.